2, 3, and
I was 21 years old, and I remember I got up early, and I was one of the only people up, and I left my dorms down in San Diego, and I kind of awkwardly walked in the back of this church. It was awkward because I wasn't going to church. In fact, I hadn't been since I was a little kid. Why was I going to church? Well, the night before, I was hanging out with some people I shouldn't have been hanging out with, doing some things that I shouldn't be doing, so bad that I thought I was going to die. I was up all night pacing around this little room, and I thought, I need to do something or go somewhere or I may die. So why was I in the back of a church? It's because I thought I was dying. So I walked out of my dorm, I walked down the street, I walked all the way to a church in San Diego, and I just stood in the back. And I remember that moment feeling so weird and so alone and just hoping that even being in that room would just do something, right? I don't know if you've ever been there, but maybe it's just going to do something if I just enter in. And the sad thing is, I left that day and nothing seemed to happen. And for 3 years after that, I decided I'm going to run and I'm going to pursue happiness and feeling better the way that I want, because that church didn't do something. It didn't deliver the way that I wanted. Until it caught up to me again. And this time I got so down that I wasn't surfing anymore. I wasn't calling people anymore. I was the picture of a depressed person. And it was at that time that I would awkwardly walk back into a church, a room like this and a group like this. And here's the crazy thing. I walked in back hoping something would happen. I just didn't think it would happen the way it happened. Is that I came in, I sat in the back all by myself, because that's where we sit, right? And I know there's, in a room like this, there's those of you out there who are doing the same thing. And I sat in the back, and yet this time someone talked to me. And they invited me to go to church with them the next day, and I went to another church service. And the day after that, I went to another one, and I got plugged in. And the crazy thing is, I went very quickly from the most depressed person to a person that found Jesus. And so why am I here talking to you? Why do I have the honor of talking about something like this? Because that was me. That was a picture of me. Now, here's the other thing. That moment, walking into that church, it was Daybreak Church, and I'll never forget being that guy and being awkward and feeling weird, and then walking in there and going, wow, leaving, probably like some of you feel in this room, like, now I have family. And I had family, and I've had family ever since. I still have family from church. And the amazing thing is that after that point, it became a passion of mine. That person who walks in the back of church became someone that I always have near and dear to my heart. In fact, that is my person. That is the person I want to minister to. And so I look at a room like this, and here's the opportunity I have tonight. I get to talk to you all about the person I was, what I was going through. In a way, my hope is that you understand what hurting people go through. Here's my other hope. Is it doesn't stop there. In fact, we empower a room to be great at meeting hurting people. What can one guy do? A little bit. What can a whole room full of people do? Well, we could change communities. So my hope today is that we're going to talk about one of the hardest things to talk about. Depression, suicide. Some of you just came and you're like, I don't know, someone invited me and I heard those cute girls there and they're like, what are we talking about tonight? I'm like, oh, sweet, depression, suicide, that's so cool, that's fun. Yeah, we could take the hardest subject And we can move right towards it, and together as a church, we don't avoid it, but we get better at it. And then we could not avoid these people, but get great at loving, hurting people. So here's what I want to do. To know me, even the guy speaking here, I feel like you need to understand me, where I come from. And so I have just a few slides. I got to introduce you to my crew. All right, you can hardly see that, but that's Bree right there. One of those better half things. She's awesome. And then the little one on the, go back. Those are my Groms, okay? How amazing is that hair? Those are two dudes. They recently cut their hair. Could we just make the aw noise? Aw. They had this Grom-like hair. It was so amazing. And they cut it because everywhere we went, they're like, tell me about your daughters. And I'm like, they just have amazing hair. And so they're like, we're not going to be called girls anymore. We're cutting it. Okay, next slide. And this is Blueberry. Blueberry is our dog. And Blueberry's only contribution to our family is she's cuddly, and we just cuddle her. She's the most brain-dead animal I've ever met in my life. We're capturing 0 thoughts in this picture right here because she has no thoughts, none at all. So that's my crew. So what we're going to do tonight, I want to talk about something that is kind of intimidating, right? If you talk about suicide, even when I was coming down, I was like, dang, this is even intimidating me a little bit. Like, how are we going to talk about this? And I remember clearly, 2 things. One is I went through a hard, depressed time as a person, but since then I've worked with depressed people, and I love moving towards it so much so that now I'm a counselor at the counseling center here, and this is something I do all the time. So that's another reason why I want to be here, because I want to take some of those things I've learned, and I want to use them. But I didn't start where I am now. In fact, I started terrified working with people. I remember going to grad school, and I don't know if you're a good student or whatever, but I was a horrible student, and oftentimes I would just sit in there, and I remember my teachers talking. I was one of those students that would be in the room but not in the room. Anyone there? You're just there, but you're not there. You're just trying to, where are my people? Right there. I remember being there, and I was like, and my teacher, I remember she said something important. I'm like, oh, crap. I did not hear what she said, but it was the class on suicide. I'm in counseling school, right? And she said something. I remember she said something about what do you do if you talk to a suicidal person, and you got to do something. And I didn't catch it. And I made myself a mental note. Find out what she said, because you may have to use that someday. Months later, I'm working with an actual person now, but I know nothing. I got my tie on, my slacks, my shirt. I'm all dressed up. And they bring in this dude who's schizophrenic, big dude, his hair's all messed up, he's living on the streets, and I'm supposed to sit there and talk to him. I got my tie, my slacks, I'm just chilling. And I'm talking to him. I'm going through what's called an assessment. I got to ask him all kinds of questions. And we get to the question that I was avoiding the whole time. I got to ask him, have you ever been suicidal? And I'm just asking, I'm hoping he says no. This dude did not say no. And let me just say real quick, this guy was fine, all right? You need to know this. This guy was completely fine down the line. Nothing happened, okay? But that's important later on. I didn't know that, though. So when I'm talking to him, I'm hoping he's not suicidal. I asked him the question, are you suicidal? And he's like, I am suicidal. It was clear as day. I was like, holy shiitake mushrooms. I'm like, okay. And I'm acting polished. I got my tie on. I'm like, I need you to stay here. I'm just going to walk out. I walk out of the room. I'm like sprinting. I'm like, okay, where's my boss? Where's someone, a colleague? Somebody's got to know. And I'm like, okay, what did your teacher say about dealing with these people? What did she say? I'm going through the files like in my brain. I could not come up with it. And then I ran into someone else. They're like, well, you have to have a guy sign a contract. I'm like, where is the contract? So I run back in the room. I was like, stay here. Everything is fine. I'm just walk out, sprint down the, okay, walk back. I finally get a picture, like a paper, and I just write on it, like, I will not hurt myself. I'm like, I'm just going to come up with a contract. And I kid you not, I go back into the room, and dude is not in the room. And I'm like, you didn't sign the contract. Okay, he's back up. I was terrified. This is my first experience. This is a scary topic, but here's the thing. I want to move towards it because we are one big family. We don't avoid things. In fact, we get right to them because God wants to work through us. Isn't that amazing? That we have a God that saw you today and he says, no, I'm going to use you. I'm going to use you. And he takes broken pieces, he puts together in a mosaic that's a beautiful picture we would never be on our own. That is our opportunity tonight. That he will take our brokenness. He took a depressed guy in a dorm room that stayed up all night, thought he was dying, and he would give him a story that is not part of my despair, but is part of my hope. Is that he took that story and he redeemed it. Isn't that powerful? Here's what I know though. In a room this size, in a topic like this, we need to illustrate what we're really talking about. And so I want to ask this row, everyone from this section, just to stand up. All of you, stand up, please. Stand up. In a room this size, we know that about this number of people, about 25% of people are dealing with suicidal thoughts on some level. Just let that sit in for a moment. So why are we talking about this? Why are we talking about this? This is a big deal. We know this isn't something distant, but this is something very near. There's an urgency because we know that y'all are dealing with something that's so heavy. Go ahead and have a seat. Here's what I also know in a room this size, is that we're going to have a complete range of people in how good you deal with depression and suicide and talking. And we've got let me just illustrate the two extremes, okay? So on one side, you got the feelers. Anyone here know they're a feeler? Okay, you raise your hand because you're feeling me right now. Okay, you got the feelers. I remember when I was a counselor for the first time, I was in the counseling center, and I had my first son, and one of my colleagues, he was also a counselor, and I was just opening up, like at a very light level, because I did not know this guy. I'm just like, yeah, I got a son, and it's been pretty hard. I look over at him, and he's weeping. And I don't know what was happening. I was like, switched from talking to now I'm comforting him, like, we'll be okay together, like patting his back, he's weeping. He's like, I'm a crier, I'm sorry. And so you got that person, like the feelers. On the other side, you got kind of like the extreme, like the robot. You ever hug someone and it feels like you're hugging like a lamp or like someone who just, I've never hugged. What is this? What are these emotions? And guys are notorious for being horrible about talking about their feelings, right? I have two sons. One is on one side, one's on the other. And I got my little feeler son and my other son. He's a little bit more like not so emotive. He's kind of logical. He's a little bit like that. And so we were watching a trailer for a movie, and something happens when you become a dad. I went from like kind of tough to just a big softie. And I am a ugly crier. Are there any ugly criers in here? I have this thing where when I start crying, it's like a chicken cry. You're like, and if and so if I'm ever crying in a sermon or a Devo or whatever, it's like the ugliest scene, and it's so awkward. I was at a memorial, and the girl had wrote a letter to her mom who died, and she started reading it. She's like, I can't do this. I was officiating. She brought it up to me, and I chicken cried the whole thing. They're like, it was cool, except for the chicken crying part. So anyway, back to the story. I got my son, and we're watching the trailer for a movie. The trailer is like 1 minute long. The movie is called Wonder. I don't know if you've seen this movie. I was not prepared for what that did on my emotions. I'm watching Wonder. Just not even the movie, the trailer. And it's this kid, he's deformed. And there's the day he's going to walk to class with his dad. He's wearing like an astronaut suit because for a deformed kid, that was the only way he felt normal. And I remember the dad was walking him to class, and the thought was, this kid who's been sheltered at home has been safe, and now he's going to go to school. He's going to be opened up to all the people there and all the ridicule. And the chickens starting to roar. The tears are coming out. And I'm like, and Zion does not know what's happening. He's right next to me. And he says something, just shut it all down. Shut the whole experience down. My little robot, he's like, why would anyone watch this movie? I don't get this movie at all. I'm like, yeah, it's so dumb. Like, it shut it out. So anyway, my point is that in a room like this, I know we have extremes. We have those feelers who intuitively get people that you know you have a heart for people, and you have other people it's just hard. Wherever you fall in that spectrum, we have a responsibility to reach hurting people, even if it's hard. So I want to contrast two words that are very important. My feelers understand this first word. This word is called sympathy. Sympathy is, I feel, so I extend that feeling, I move towards you. Sympathy is driven by my emotion to what you're going through. I may have had a similar experience. I feel a sadness by your situation. We have what's called a sympathy card. Have you heard of it? Here's the problem with sympathy. For many of us, we don't feel that emotion, so we don't extend it. I don't feel, so I don't extend it. I want to teach you another word that is so much more powerful that everyone could do it, and it's the word of empathy. Empathy is not about me and my emotions. Empathy is really, I don't have a whole lot to do with it. It's all about you. It's all about what are you going through? And so we don't even have empathy cards. You know why we don't have an empathy card? Because an empathy card would mean I have to write you a letter that says, how are you doing? How are you really doing? In that letter, I would have a self-addressed envelope with a stamp coming back to me. You would send that back to me, and I would send you another card that says, man, I am so sorry you're feeling the way that you are. That must be very hard. You see, it's so easy to make a statement based on a feeling. You know what's harder? Is you move towards someone else and you understand their experience. That means that you don't even have to feel that emotion. All you have to do is move towards them and go, how are you? How are you? Man, that seems hard. And so tonight is all about how do we have empathy for hurting people? And let me just tell you, I have blown this time and time and time again. So you are in good company if you struggle with this. You are in good company if this is hard for you. You're in good company if this is something that feels unnatural, because I feel all those things at times, but I still have that same responsibility to move towards hurting people. So here's the thing we're going to do. I want to go to a text. This is John 5. Who's got their Bible? Like a real Bible. All right. John 5. I want to set the scene a little bit. My hope is we could walk through this scene to see the empathy of Jesus, that we could see a picture of hurting and know, how does our God, the same God we have today, how does he help hurting people? All right, John 5, here you go. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there in Jerusalem near the sheep gate, there was a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda. It means house of mercy. It's surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. So here's the thing. If you've been in a pool before, you got 2 shapes, right? You got the jelly bean, and you got the rectangle. This is such an oddity in the Bible that for many years, people said the Bible doesn't exist. There's no 5-sided pool. We haven't found that place. That does not exist. Therefore, the Bible does not exist. Until they found the 5-sided pool. I want to show you a picture. Pool of Bethesda today. I got to go there. I got to teach there. But can you do the next slide? How do we have a 5-sided pool? It's actually 2 pools with a wall in between. 5 total sides. This is our scene. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie. The blind, the lame, the paralyzed. So what is our setting? We got our pool. Who's around it? We have 3 types of people, but really there's many people in between there. We have blind people, we have lame people, we have paralyzed people. This is a gathering of desperate people. This is also a pathetic scene. The worst of the worst. People were just left there by this pool. And so you could imagine this isn't like an organized scene. There's no rows. This is a place where people are just dumped and laying everywhere. And I love we get introduced to one guy. You ready? You ready to meet our guy? One Excuse me, I had a burp. That's gross. One who had been an invalid for 38 years. 38 years. Now, some scholars would say this guy was a quadriplegic. That's what the word means. We know this guy has been laying there for 38 years. It's kind of impressive in some ways and yet so hard in others. This dude was still alive after 38 years. Limited mobility. We see the scene, all the people there. Now, here's an interesting part about your Bible. If you go down to the bottom, why are all these people at a pool hanging out? What is the purpose? Some of your Bibles do not have this, but others do. It says, they waited for the moving of the waters. From time to time, an angel of the Lord would come down and stir up the water. The first one into the pool, after each such disturbance, would be cured of whatever disease they had. So why are they at the pool? Well, one of the things you need to understand is we're talking about Jewish people who were heavily influenced by their neighbors, okay? So they had all these weird beliefs about water. For instance, fishermen, oftentimes when they're in the Sea of Galilee, they didn't want to cross the Sea of Galilee. Because you know what they believed was at the bottom of the Sea of Galilee? The abyss. And the Leviathan, the big dragon was down there. So they wouldn't go across as much as they would go around. That's why when Jesus was walking on water, they feel like, we're in the abyss. It's happening, and here's a man walking on water. These people had all kinds of weird beliefs. And so why are they at the pool? Here's the belief. We're at the pool because if we just stare at the water, when the bubbles come up, the myth that they believe is that the first person into the pool is going to be healed. Now, isn't this kind of crazy? Let's just think about who are people again. We have the what? Blind. We have the lame and the paralyzed. Oh, come on now, help me out. We have the who? Blind. We have the lame. We have the paralyzed. What's the problem with this picture? How was the blind dude going to see the bubbles? How was the paralyzed person going to get in the bubbles? How are these people possibly going to get in the bubbles? And you could imagine, they're all staring. You ever stare at something long enough, you see it, even if you don't see it, it's not actually happening? Picture like a bunch of people racing, and they're on the line, and they're just waiting, they flinch. How many false starts there are? And you could imagine, this place had so many false starts. Just one person thought they saw the bubbles. And boom, everyone starts piling in. The blind guy hears it, he's going in. The paralyzed guy is just trying to rip his way in. The lame guy with his deformities is trying to get in. Could you imagine how pathetic the scene is? How sad the scene is. And they're staring at these bubbles. And I love at this point, Jesus enters into our equation. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he'd been in this condition for a long time, he asked them, do you want to get well? I love that he saw them and he learned about this dude. Sir, the invalid replied, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water stirred. When I'm trying to get in, someone else goes ahead of me. This cracks me up. You could imagine the disciples with Jesus. They've seen him heal, right? They've seen him help. They've seen Jesus do big things. And you could imagine if we're with Jesus, walking with Jesus, Jesus is at this place of despair and he's found his guy. He learned about him. So we're all ready for Jesus to move and to do something. And in our mind, it's happening. Jesus, he found his guy. Oh, this is going to be good. This is going to be good. He's going to find his guy. He's got him. And you could imagine everyone's watching the guy turn. He's like, Jesus reaching out his hand. He's like, I got you. I'm reaching out my hand. And everyone's just, all the disciples are like, yes, it's happening. Heal that man. Move that bus. Do something right now. It's about to go down. And the guy says, Jesus, yes, help me into the bubbles. Do you see the irony of that? The guy is holding on to the healer. He's asking the healer to lower him into the bubbles. The crazy thing is I had to step back and ask myself, man, don't I do that too at times? As I look down at something in my life and go, Jesus, will you just do this for me? It's not bad to ask him, but I notice how often I'm asking him, Jesus, would you just heal this one thing? Jesus, would you just put this person in my life? Jesus, would you take this one thing out of it? Jesus, would you take away this memory of that time I got hurt? Jesus, would you take away that piece of my life that I hate or it causes me to shame? Would you just lower me into the bubbles? And I wonder at a time if Jesus says, I don't want to lower you, I want to lift you up. That is our scene. Now what's crazy, something happens here. Jesus said to him, get up, pick up your mat and walk. At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and he walked. This is an incredible scene. We don't even know if this guy believed. In fact, it doesn't really seem like he believed. Here's the thing. What this paralyzed guy felt physically, a depressed person feels emotionally. And oftentimes when we're dealing with them, we see the clothes, we see someone who looks normal, and we never understand that inside this person feels broken, they feel lost, they feel stuck. And so when a depressed person is dealing with it, they're often feeling just as stuck as a paralyzed person. So I want to commit tonight. Can we do something together? Can we learn about people who are hurting in a way that empowers us? Can we, as one big family, and I love this series, can this family get better at understanding who are these hurting people? Can we understand what it's like in such a way that equips us to move towards one? Can we do that? And I love in this scene, we see a picture of Jesus doing things that we could still do today. The first fill in here is when you understand what a suicidal person goes through, the first thing is depression. This is feeling sad over a prolonged period of time. So sadness is feeling down, right? I want to differentiate. A lot of us get sad. Sometimes you feel down. What a depressed person is feeling, though, they're not just sad, but they're sad for a long period of time. Now, why is that? It could be several things. It could be that genetically, in their family tree, they have depression. It's something their mom had and their grandmother had. Sometimes a person just doesn't have the right neurotransmitters and neurochemicals firing, and so this person just becomes depressed. Sometimes it's a whole upbringing. Or it could be just one simple act, but there's many reasons. And if you're a depressed person in this room, I want to talk to you about this because it's hard. You could be dealing with that. So there's all kinds of reasons. But one thing is true is that oftentimes you didn't do anything wrong. Some of the symptoms that really concern me, and I want you to know what they are. I want you to identify it in yourself or be able to know it in someone else, is some of the things you could see the clearest. If someone is sleeping a ton, or maybe they're not sleeping at all. Or if their appetite is down, or their eating is down, or they're eating a lot. But some of these changes you could start to see and wonder, does this person have depression? Another thing you would often see is a person who used to like doing things is no longer doing those same things. If you start to see all of those together, I want you to be really worried about this person. Here's the other thing I want to let you know is that sometimes we have suicidal thoughts, bad thoughts. It doesn't mean you're a suicidal person. It just means sometimes that's in your mind, okay? So just because you have the thought doesn't mean you're a suicidal person. There's lots of people, they think about that all the time, and they would never do it. But if you go back to our story and our guy, I don't know that he was depressed, but I wonder, how is this guy not depressed? Everything he's going through. Our next feeling is helplessness. Feeling as if I have no power to improve my circumstances. It reminds me of the story of the bleeding woman. This woman is a story in the Bible. This woman was bleeding for 12 years. What we know about this woman is that when you're bleeding, even for a day, you can't be around other people because for a Jewish person to touch you, or you would touch them, you would make them unclean. And you could possibly be killed for something like that. And this woman had spent all she had. She's seen every doctor. Spent all her money, gone through treatments, and instead of getting better, she got worse. This is a picture of a helpless person. This guy had been an invalid for 38 years. Can you imagine that? The next thing is hopelessness. Feeling like nothing can be done to make things better. And this is a picture of our guy. Hopelessness means that I no longer have any sort of optimism about anything to get better, and so I'm just staring at something. In fact, I've given up even the thought that things could get better. And the last thing is called learned helplessness. Learned helplessness. When I face a negative situation repeatedly and come to believe I can't improve it, so why even try? So how do we learn about learned helplessness? And I want to introduce you to an experiment. Is everyone tracking? I know it's a lot of writing, a lot of notes, but I want you to have this. So there's a phenomenon called learned helplessness, and we learn this by animal experimentation. Early psychology was brutal on animals. This experiment, what they did is they had this pin. It was about this high, and in this pin on the floor was a shocking floor, okay? And what they did is they want to bring animals into this pin, and they're just going to shock them, and they're going to see what happens next. The pin has a door on it. They have 3 different trials for 3 different types of experiment within one big experiment, okay? In the first experiment, they bring in the dogs, they shut the door, they pull this big lever down, it shocks the floor, and these dogs start running around. They open up the door, all the dogs run out. In the second phase, they bring the dogs back in. You could imagine these dogs at a time, you just got shocked. You're probably like, I don't want to go back in there. But they bring them back in there. They close the door. They pull that lever again. It shocks the dogs again. This time, the door, instead of going up, it stays down. In the third phase, what they do is they bring the dogs back, and at this time, these dogs are messed up, okay? They bring them in. They close the door. They pull the lever. They shock these dogs again. And this time, just like the first time, they open up the door, but here's the difference. The dogs don't run out. You know what these dogs do? They just lay on the ground and they take it. And I want you to understand this because for a depressed person who's tried everything, they're hopeless, they're helpless. Sometimes you've tried everything, nothing works. And at a time, you stop believing that anything will work. And so at a moment in time, you just give up and say, the best I could do is just lay down and take it and minimize my pain to the best of my ability. Have you been there? I want to give you just a quick tip. If that's you, if it's someone in this room who's depressed on that level, sometimes the very thing you don't want to do is the very thing you ought to do. And it feels hard, but in those moments, if you're feeling depressed or like there's no hope or helpless, sometimes when it's all focused on how I feel in the moment, the best thing you could do is not make it about you. You move away from you and you find one other person to help in some way or love on in some way and not make it about you. And here's the thing, is I truly believe that will help. That God works through our actions, especially as we're serving. And if you're depressed, even moving towards one person, it could help. So what did Jesus do? How did he help this person? I'm going to talk about a few things. Isn't this kind of amazing that God, even what he's doing in the Bible, is still so relevant today and so practical and helpful? The first thing, what did Jesus do? He met the people. He met them at their level, not yours. You meet people at their level, not yours. Here's the thing. If you think about Jesus in the story, and you think about the place he was going, and you think about the people that were around, and you think about the sickness, and you think about how disgusting the scene was. Here was a good Jewish man. He's going to walk by sick people, which means that he's no longer able to teach. In fact, he can't go back to his church. He can't go back and do his duties because for a good Jewish person, he's now unclean. Jesus walked into this disgusting scene of depravity, pathetic people broken, left there. And I love that this is the picture of our God. This is a person who would not just go to a broke or lost place, but he would make himself completely defiled for the people that he was going to touch, knowing that it would make him unclean in the process. Do you see the heart of our God? He entered into the scene. It was disgusting. This is how God feels about his kids. He's willing to make himself completely unclean so we can be clean. I love that he entered into this situation to say, I'm going to meet them at their level. He put away his crown for you, for me, to enter in. Do you get that? Do you see it? Do you see how powerful that is? God met them at their level. And because of that, so many people who didn't even know who he was were open to this man named Jesus. Sometimes, some of the biggest mistakes, and can I just be real? Safe space, whatever you do. Damien did something really cool the other week, and I want to try and kind of work off that. He illustrated what family does and how you could enter in and be a part of healing and hope and help. So I want to ask my buddy Tom to come up here. Everyone give Tom a little bit of clap. I'm probably messing everyone's camera up and audio up, and if anyone's listening online, they have no idea what's going down, but I really don't care. So they don't pay me to preach, they pay me to counsel. So, hey, I want you to sit down. So this is one of my closest buddies, a guy in my life group, and I love this guy dearly. But the thing I want to illustrate is in this moment, I want you just to be a picture of a depressed person. I want you all to stand up. Everyone, come on, stand up. Tom, I actually want you to sit on the ground. And the thing that Damien showed is the power of community. And I want to illustrate something else. Sometime when you have depression, you're in a room like this, filled with people you've never felt more alone. And you feel the looks, you feel the awkwardness. It couldn't feel worse. How's that feeling, Tom? A little awkward. You've got people around and you feel isolated. And here's the fault. Here's some of my early counseling, even my help for people. I remember working with some of my first depressed clients. They would describe their condition like being in a well all by themselves. It was dark, it was alone, they were isolated, they were depressed, and they were stuck down in the mud in a well. And I look back on some of my early help, and the way that I tried to help people was, it's so embarrassing to me. But it was almost like I would take the lid off that well, and I'd make comments like, hey, did you take your vitamins? Did you go on a run? You're depressed. Why? Have you prayed about it? I had a cousin who was depressed. He's not doing that. Oh, you don't feel good? Well, I got a family member who just got in a car wreck and they got cancer and they're dying and they got AIDS. And look at you. You're sad? Don't you appreciate anything I'm doing for you? Don't you care? Their situation is so much worse. And the problem is that each time, each word, it was like a rock that I was dropping down in that well. I was just dropping it on their head. It didn't help them. It just made me feel better. It almost felt like I was gratifying them. Here's the thing. It's not about the words we say. Sometimes the best thing we could do is say no words at all. And at a moment, I just sit down and I meet him at his level. He doesn't feel any different. You're still all up there and we're down here. But now, he's not alone. I love you, buddy. Thanks. Give it up for Tom. By the way, Tom gives the best hugs. If you're not feeling or sun's going down, you just run up and give him a hug. I give you full permission to just hug that man. The power of your presence. Do you realize that sometimes we put a pressure to say the right thing, and sometimes the best thing you could do is not say a thing. You enter into someone's situation, and now they're not alone, and they're with you, and it's amazing what that will do to someone who's felt isolated. Is maybe for the first time, that kid who was depressed walked into the back of the church, and now someone finally sat next to him. And it changed my life. You have power in your presence. Is it amazing that God wants to use you to reach out and hurt and help someone? That you could go out and pull someone in, look at someone who's isolated. You could understand their mindset and go, hey, tell me about you. And it's incredible to think that simple act could change a heart like mine or a guy like me in that situation. Completely change my trajectory in life. There is power in your presence. I love this. Psalm 42. It says, he lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. That he entered into that muck, that pit with us. Okay, the next thing is ask questions and avoid making statements. I love Jesus said, do you want to get well? Now let me give you just real quick context. He's asking a great question. For a paralyzed person, this guy did have a job. In fact, certain places he would go or he'd get dropped off, the religious Pharisees would walk by and they'd want to make a big show that they were going to be benevolent. They'd probably even jingle the purse a little bit like, it's coming. That paralyzed the person would be like, oh, here it is. I know my role. Now I make a big deal about how you, holy Pharisee, are going to give me some money. This broken, paralyzed man, you are so amazing. And they would play off each other. This dude had a job. He had an identity. He had something. God said, I want to ask you, do you really want to get well? Because it may mean you have to give up everything to get there. And we are in a culture that loves to make statements. We love making statements. I love, even in counseling, can I just be super honest? He did the safe space thing. I love making statements, and most people who come into my office, I can figure out what's going wrong and how to fix it very fast. I've been doing this a long time. There's an impulsive part of me that wants to tell them what to do because I actually want that victory. I want to feel smart. I want to feel powerful. And one of the best things you could do is set that aside and go, tell me about you, because when you leave, I want you to have the victory. You came up with the solution that you are competent and capable to fix and change your life. And all I need to do is just be a presence with you and ask you great questions. Here's the thing we also see. Jesus, I love this. Jesus asked 307 questions. He is asked 183. You know how many answers directly? 3. Jesus got this. He was so good at asking people in a way that drew them out. Next thing, understand their level of motivation to change. Now, if someone is suicidal, we stop what we're doing and we go to help them, especially if they say, I'm going to take my life. I'm going to talk more about that in just a moment. But for a person who's really depressed, you may have to ask yourself, is this really a person who's ready to get well? One of the worst things we do as Christians is someone says they need help and we start sprinting. I got the resource guide, I got you a hotel, I got you a week's worth of groceries, and we overcompensate, but we cannot work harder than other people. They need to work, and so you may need to ask yourself, are they ready to work? And if they are, then maybe I meet them in that space and I help them. But if they are not, I can't work harder than they are because this is not about me. It's about this person finding the strength inside themselves. Sometimes it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And the next thing, Jesus, we learn later in the story, Jesus found this guy he'd healed, and he found him at the temple again. He said, stop sinning, or something worse may happen. Now, it was kind of a harsh treatment of this dude, but I love that Jesus followed up. Jesus followed up. If someone opens up to you, someone shares a prayer request, someone shares their heart, it is amazing if you even keep a note in your phone and a week later you follow up with that person and say, hey, you said this, I just want to see, how are you? That says, I care about you so much so that I want to go back to that thing you said. People don't do that. But if you do, you will be a person of influence in their life. Okay, 2 things to ask directly. I want to get real practical and real specific about suicide. We're almost done, but this is super important. 2 things. If someone seems like they're depressed, they're not eating, they're not sleeping, they're apathetic, they're not enjoying things, I want you to ask them 2 things. The first is plan, the second is intent. Plan. Do you have a plan to harm yourself? An intent. How do you plan to do it? Are you going to do it? Do you have a plan to hurt yourself? An intent. Do you intend to hurt yourself? I've had many people come to me and say they were suicidal. I said, sorry, we're calling someone in, calling your mom, calling the police, whatever, and they get mad at me. And the thing I always say is there's nothing I wouldn't do to help you not harm yourself, including have you be mad at me. What if it's you in this room? What if you're one of those people that's suffering? What if, man, you didn't even know you were coming tonight, you came and it's almost crazy. You're like, he's talking to me. Everything he's talking about is exactly what I'm dealing with. What if that's you? I want to ask you, would you be brave enough? Would you be brave enough to let someone know how you're really doing? Let them know that you're hurting. Would you let them know that you're struggling, and you may be a person who's trying to have pride or even carry yourself a certain way and not let anyone know how you're really doing, but would you be willing to be real? If that's you, I also want to give you a number you can call. There's someone there available any moment, any time that would love to talk to you. I want to remind you that your feelings are not forever. They're just in this moment. The last thing I want to do is just remind you, you may be wondering, what do I say? How do I say it? How do I get this person help? How do I change things? I want to remind you that we are not the healer. We just need to introduce people to the healer. It's like we're tapping that guy on the shoulder, the guy reaching down, holding Jesus' hand, let me into the bubbles, and we just walk up to the side and tap him on the shoulder, and we say, hey, look behind you. Psalm 147:3 says, he heals the brokenhearted and he binds up their wounds. We can leave with assurance tonight that we have the answer to disconnectedness. We have the answer to depression. We have the answer to someone who doesn't know if they want to be around. We have the answer to someone who's struggling and knowing, I don't think anyone cares about me. So we could introduce him to the very person who changed our life, the very person that changed my entire life as a broken college kid, that we have the answer. Tonight, I want to let you know remind you that this is family business, family time. As we close, we're going to put an arm on each other's shoulders, just pray together. I want to remind you that we're going to have a prayer team down here that's available to pray with you, pray for you. I'm going to stick around. My life group's going to stick around because we love you. This is a place where you are accepted, where you do belong. And we have a God who cares enough to leave his kingdom to enter into the filth for an invalid, for a broken person, for me, and for you. Would you all pray with me? God, we thank you that you saw a worth in us that we didn't even see ourselves. You care enough to know the state of each of our hearts. You care enough to know exactly where we are in life, what we're dealing with, what we're struggling with. And you don't look at us as a disapproving father, but as a dad who really cares. Lord, would you help us to understand hurting people? Would you use us to be an extension of you, that we could reach out and be your hands, your feet? God, we're so thankful that you would use us, that we could walk alongside you and you would take us and that you give us worth. God, we thank you. Thank you for each and every person in this room. We know that you care deeply about us. You designed us. You want to use us, and that you dwell with us. Lord, we thank you for who you are, what you've done. And God, we praise you for what you're going to do. In your name we pray. Amen.